Okay, hi. I'm going to do something that goes a lot less deep than Michelle. I'm just going to scan past 4 different examples of reconstructed cities or cities that are in the process of being reconstructed, just to try and differentiate between different concepts or different attitudes that were used in this reconstruction. Now, Rotterdam was often kind of offset against Middelburg, which is another town in the south of Holland, because Rotterdam was always the modern reconstruction, and then Middelburg was the historicist, the traditional, the old-fashioned reconstruction. And here you can see Middelburg. It was bombed by the German forces, also in the early years of the war, or in the early weeks of the war. And it was a very beautiful medieval town in the capital of the province of Zeeland. And here you can see people trying to figure out their way in between the rubble and clearing, the start of the clearing out of the rubble. And here you see the reconstruction plan that was actually made very early on in the war, and you see again the guy that Michelle also showed on her presentation, Sijs Inquart, the German head of the occupation in the Netherlands, and you see the mayor explaining to the mayor of Middelburg explaining very enthusiastically to Sijs Inquart the reconstruction plan. Now, the reconstruction plan, what you can see, this is a drawing of how the center of Middelburg, how it looked before the war, and this is a drawing how it will look after the war. And what you can see, it's interesting to look at it closely, because first you look at, you think it's exactly the same, but then you can see, then afterwards you can see that it's not exactly the same. It's some of the squares are made slightly bigger. There are alleyways and streets being added, like this one. You can see squares being made a little bit broader. You can see slight differences, nearly like this little alleyway around this little building. You can see these kind of nuances with the old situation, and this is because, and that makes it an interesting plan what they did. By the way, this in the first years of the war, while the reconstruction was coming on, they also had to make emergency housing for the shops, and so these are the emergency shops. And again, it nearly looks like a kind of a Disney architecture. They're made of wood and plaster, but they have their own kind of picturesqueness and their own kind of romance in them, their own kind of medievalness. But these are the shops, and these were built around the center. Very beautiful. Here you can see the actual reconstruction happening. Now, all these buildings here, they are brand new. And they're also not copies of what was there. They're really brand new, and they were designed specifically for here, of course. But it's a new medieval architecture. So it's a kind of, and this is also done by a school, a school of architecture. So it's not a literal school, but like a genre or a movement of architecture that was called the Delftse School. And the Delftse School it was called that way because there were a bunch of professors in the University of Delft, and they all believed very deeply in the idea of traditionalist architecture. So they said that they were very much against the modernist architecture, and they believed in traditionalist architecture. And why did they believe in traditionalist architecture? Because it had the values of community, it had the values of people being connected with their past, it had the values of regionalism, so it was typical for the region of Northwest Europe, etc. This is also why people like Seyss-Inquart and the German occupiers, they were very much supportive of this kind of traditionalism. I'm not saying that the traditionalism was in itself purely Nazi, but it is so that it did fit within the Nazi ideas of what good architecture should be. And good architecture should represent the volkische, as they call it, so the aspirations and the history of the northwestern Aryan Volk. And so all of a sudden this type of architecture was filled up with these types of values. Here you can see also so it was not just an architecture that was being copied in its visual way, but also the building techniques were even medieval. So you can see these guys here they were not using concrete to make an arch. They were really using wood and then brickwork over it, and etc. So it was Middelburg in that way. It's a pretty hardcore example of traditionalist neo-medieval architecture. And here you can see it's gradually filling up. You can still see some holes in it, but you can see the new architecture gradually filling up the city. You can see that the church and the cloisters around it are still not finished. They are still being reconstructed. But what you see there is the center of Middelburg has probably the same percentage of original architecture in it than as the center of Rotterdam. Only they did a better job at camouflaging that. Now, Warsaw, which is of course in its destruction and its human drama, is incomparable to Middelburg or even Rotterdam. Warsaw was destroyed nearly completely, was razed. That was also the conscious decision by the German army in 1944, after the big Warsaw uprising, the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. So the city was not as a warning, or not as an act of within. It was not to destroy armies or anything, because they had already occupied it. It was just razed consciously by the German army. And this is even if it's in color, this is a picture from just after the war. So it was one enormous field of rubble with some ruins still standing. It was one of the biggest urban destructions that we know of. Here you can see the rubble went on endless and endless and endlessly. It was used to, in the end, the rubble was used to as a kind of landfills, but then they made little mounds of rubble on top of which the new buildings were built. If you go to Warsaw and you visit the area where there used to be the Jewish ghetto, you will see that all these kind of post-war Plattenbau buildings, they all stand on a little mound, and that is the rubble of the old Warsaw. Sometimes this enormous emptiness was filled in, for example, here with this. This was literally a present by Joseph Stalin to Warsaw. So it was with gigantic Stalinist buildings that had absolutely nothing to do, of course, with the history or the tradition or the architectural form of Warsaw. It was just a pure, like an alien starship dropping down on the earth and representing not Polishness or Warsawness, but it represented the fact that it now came within the sphere of influence of the Soviet Union. But there's one interesting thing about the center of Warsaw, and that is that it was the historical center of Warsaw was extremely beautiful, and it was also, its beauty was widely acknowledged, for example, by this Venetian painter from the school of Canaletto. He's named Bellotto, and he made a whole series of slightly idealized cityscapes of the center of Warsaw in the 18th century. Here you see some more, and there's a whole series of paintings and these paintings allow you to reimagine the beauty and also the kind of the fine-grained urban tissue of Warsaw, even if you're standing in the middle of this field of rubble. Now, one of the interesting things is that Warsaw did something extremely radical. They decided to rebuild their center, the center of their ancient center, to rebuild it, but then completely. To rebuild it, not like Middelburg, where there's a new version of medieval architecture, or where there's a kind of the traditionalism as an architectural movement could kind of lay their own interpretation over Middelburg. No, they decided to really rebuild it, reconstruct it, as a copy. So, and what is interesting about that is that where do you get your sources? So there were there were photographs of old Warsaw. There were still some buildings standing there as kind of ruins, just the facade nearly falling over, etc. So there was some of that. And there were the paintings of Bellotto. So what happened in... this is how it looks now. What happened is, and here you can, if you walk through the center of Warsaw, you will see these big reproductions of paintings by Bellotto, and then they will give you exactly the same view as what you see for real. So the center of Warsaw is a complete reconstruction, complete synthetic reconstruction. But as you can see, it was done with seriousness. It was done with craftsmanship, etc. But still, it is a complete reconstruction. And one of the things that we heard is that Bellotto was a Venetian painter. So he looked at Warsaw and he painted it, but he sometimes thought that, of course, this is Northern Europe, that the buildings were a little bit boring. So Bellotto added ornament and added little towers or little turrets or little bow windows, or added color, added etc. Made it a little bit better or a little bit more Baroque than the real thing was. And so what we have now, but then Bellotto was used as the basis for the reconstruction. So Warsaw is not just a reconstruction of the past, but it's a better version of what it ever was, in a way. And what you also see in Warsaw is that it doesn't matter if it's not for real. It doesn't matter, because the tourists come anyway. It's a touristic center anyway. The same with Middelburg. Middelburg is hugely appreciated by people. It's seen as a very beautiful town. So the fact that there is no literal authenticity doesn't make it feel less authentic to a lot of people.
I did not know about Middelburg. I did know about Warsaw.
You thought Middelburg was actually...
Well, I've been there 20 years, but I
yeah.
knew it was just pretty and still.
Yeah, exactly. It is very pretty. Another example, which a little bit the same, is Saint-Malo in Brittany, in France. There you have the same kind of neo-medieval reconstruction that stays very close to the original, but still is not the original. And again, a very popular touristic town for its medieval center.
It's also the center of Frankfurt.
Yes,
This neoclassic restoration that is hated.
it's hated.
Yeah, Germans in Frankfurt really dislike it because it's this polished, commercialized version of a medieval town. So it's more controversial.
Okay. That would be interesting to research, like where are exactly the differences between Frankfurt and, for example, Middelburg or Saint-Malo, and see, or Dresden, and see what are the factors? What makes one hated and the other appreciated? Okay, now we go to a little bit further on in history, and this is an earthquake. The Belice earthquake of 1968 in Sicily, and it destroyed a whole valley of with different small towns and villages also in 1968. Here you can see one of the total destruction of this village called Ghibellina, lying on a hill. You can see the actually very beautiful helmets the Italian firemen have. So what happened in Ghibellina is Ghibellina and the other villages and towns around it is these were of course small towns. So and they were completely destroyed. So what do you do with the population? If you start with reconstructing the villages, which in principle was possible, except that then they would still stand on top of a fault line. If you would do that, then where would you leave the villagers in the meantime? So it would take too long. So what they did in Italy is the villagers and townspeople, they were put in temporary housing, which took way too long to build. So these were really, so people had to share houses, people had to go and live with family, and a lot of people actually just left Sicily all the same, moved to America, for example. This was a huge, because the earthquakes were the last kind of the last push they needed in a poor area. This is this town of Poggio Reale, with a beautiful Baroque kind of church that stood there, and a stairway that going up there, but completely demolished. So what you have now, if you go there, you can visit all these ghost villages. With nobody living there, all the people have moved away. This is a new, what the plan became was to build new villages. So it was not Ghibellina, but Nova Ghibellina, which was built 5 to 10 or sometimes 15 kilometers away from the original, and to build new villages there. And this is one what you see there. So these new villages, they took the population of the old villages, and the old villages just were left as ruins. But these new villages and new towns, these were seen as a huge opportunity by the architectural community in Italy in the 1970s. And so famous architects like Vittorio Gregotti or Alberto Burri or Ludovico Quaroni, these people, all these names you can forget, but these people, these architects that did not come from Sicily, but often from Venice, from Milano, from Rome, they started building these new town centers, for example, for for these villages, like this one. In this one was made by with this kind of strange geometrical patterns in it, with a kind of a neo-Baroque, neo-Renaissance, but then done in concrete, very postmodern architecture. All these new villages built in the 1970s, they are kind of a collection, a museum of architecture, in Italian architecture of the 1970s, and then in all its kind of sometimes crazy form. But what you also see is that you go to these villages and they are empty. They're empty. People, the first generation of people, they still moved into the city, but then very soon people started moving out of these new villages because there were still no jobs. They had exactly the same problems as before, but then they lived in an ugly concrete town where they had to wait sometimes forever to get a house. So these villages have been emptying out. Like a lot of villages, actually, this is a problem in Italy and in different places. But what you have here is you have the ghost towns of the ruins that were destroyed by the earthquake. But then you have new ghost towns that are kind of postmodernist ghost towns. That, well, these pictures show a kind of a good impression of it. And then there is one town where an artist, and I literally felt his name drop out of my head. So, Buri, thank you. Thank you. He took Ghibellina, which I showed you in the beginning, this kind of hilly town, and he made a gigantic earthwork covering on top of the ancient town plan of Ghibellina, and covered it in concrete, leaving kind of the streets open, so you can. It's like one of those mazes in a French garden, but then made of concrete. And so this is an interesting part of it, because there were also other projects in these 1970s towns where a very important part of it became the commemoration of the tragedy, and not just the commemoration of the tragedy, but since then also the commemoration of the village as a community. And the commemoration of the community as a whole, because the community might have fallen apart because everybody moved to America or moved somewhere else. It's the commemoration of this village that people still have memories of, but then the people who are having memories of it are also dying out. So it's the commemoration of the memory of the people who live there, etc. So there's this endless reservoir of melancholic thoughts that are being held or represented by this earthwork, which you could also call completely megalomaniacal, of course. Now the last example is also the most recent one. It's the tsunami caused by the earthquake in Fukushima in 2011. This is the town of Rikuzentakata. Here it's lying on the coast and being really completely, it was all kind of one-story buildings, nearly all of it, and being completely swept into the sea. As you can see, it looks absolutely crazy, this image. And of course, a reconstruction of something like this, then in come the forces of government, and the national government comes in. There's huge funds being liberated to rebuild this city. And of course, there's no real reconstruction. It's not really an option because there's hardly anything there anymore. So what you see is, and they want to avoid having to go through this again. So the entire city is being leveled up, and on top of that will come a new recontruction. Now, and it might have architecture like this on it. And this is also, if you look at, for example, the reconstruction plan for Hiroshima of the 1950s by Kenzo Tange, it has this same kind of aesthetic, this same kind of hyper-modern, very monumental, very green, very kind of open, a monumental aesthetic to it. And then there's always the one symbolic building that somehow by miracle has survived. So of course that one gets to stay in, or it's also leveled up a little bit. But so this is the normal way of a reconstruction, how reconstruction would go normally. Yet there was a group of architects led by Toyo Ito, who's one of Japan's leading architects. And he was with a group of architects, and they had offered their services to the reconstruction of because Fukushima is more of is a kind of a region, so they had offered their services there, and they were refused. It was said, no, we don't need you can come later. When we start doing the buildings, then you can do something and come later. So when the adults have done their stuff, then you architects can come in. So they then started a completely different project. You could say it's a kind of an alternative reconstruction plan, and it was called a home for all, because they saw that due to this destruction, the communities had spread out far away. They had to go and live with family, or they were spread out far away. So what they did is they said, we have to make community houses, community homes, community centers where people can come in and meet each other, and there will be culture, and there will be education, and there will be information, and there will be meeting and food and drink, etc. And so these it worked a little bit like, you could compare it to acupuncture. So instead of these enormous logistical, infrastructural operations of the real reconstruction, they just made little pins in little drops in the ocean with a number of pavilions. And this is the one done by Ito himself. And they were also built with the community. There was a huge therapeutic ambition with these things also, that the people would come together to build these houses, and they were using, in this case, very traditional Japanese wood construction techniques. And you see it's a little bit outside of it's a little bit in the hills outside of where the actual city was. And here you can see it. This is one of them. There are many, more than a dozen. Here's a theater piece being played in one of them. Also, again, you can see this also a form of traditionalism, but then in a different way, a kind of the using of traditional construction and material techniques. That's it. Thank you.